of the former Soviet Union was divided up into 70 places, the whole of the Soviet Union, and VCA got southern Ukraine, which included Odessa. Since that time, they cover the whole of so one of the things that we did was begin a seminary there, very much like what we're doing in Egypt, and that's what got me interested. And so for 12 years we started. The Odessa Biblical Seminary, and saw it really produce a biblical seminary. And saw it really produce. And out of that, had the privilege of, it started in 96. By 2000, we graduated our first class, out of which came quite a few men who went into ministry. There was no Ukraine Presbyterian Church at the time, and so we actually began it during that period of those first 4 years, so that when they graduated, these there must have been at least 6 of the graduates that desired to be pastors. So we worked out a jerry-rigged a system where we could get them ordained and get them placed, and so they became basically church planters. And out of that came the Ukraine Presbyterian Church, which is having a great ministry. Almost all of the pastors, and I say there were some that almost all, because some of them did leave because of family issues, stayed and have stayed during the crisis that they're having, their battles with Russia, and to minister. So they got their families out for protection purposes with them all these years. So starting with is then when we, with that first graduating class, saw that church develop, and eventually they then start their own seminary so they can do training internally, and it's great testimonies that we could hear. So that's where I got sort of caught into the theological education by in a non-traditional form, where you fly in and teach and so forth, with the intent that they would eventually become the teachers after they've gotten their feet wet in the ministry for a while, and they're doing that now, so it's wonderful to see. The second time we did it was with Pastor Doug in Israel, so we took the model that put it into Israel. We had classes there for about 10 years, and after that period of time, it closed down. It wasn't continuing. We had a good rush at the beginning, but it didn't stay. So later, after I got to New Geneva, around 1910, I think. 2010, not 1910. Yeah. I was just, you laughed, and I was going to say we're about the same age, so be careful. You have to sort of keep the audience, sedate. You still love me? Okay. Okay. All right. So anyway, there was a call that came to a friend of mine who's working with us now in this with Equipping Pastors International, which is a small mission that was started by Dr. Jack Arnold, real good friend, who got the idea of starting Equipping Pastors International because I used to bring him to Ukraine so he could teach there, and he liked the concept of coming in, and instead of bringing all the students here, which was a model that was followed for the longest time, which meant you can only bring a few number of students because of the cost and also family issues, whether you leave your family behind to study or you bring your family with you, and so it was costly. Anyway, so he liked that, and so he developed Equipping Pastors as a way of going to the field, going to the country, and finding the students and teaching them there, or pastors who had not had the opportunity for more real theological education or full education. And so, and out of that, the call came from pastor and his administrative staff in Cairo, and so Jim went and flew there, had a vision trip with them, and at that time the main approach was not having a formal seminary. It was more doing conferences on an ongoing level, but there was no formal certificates or anything of that nature, but the students would get good education. So they were wanting more of a seminary because the local seminary that was owned by the church, the denomination, really was going liberal, not holding to the scriptures as they should. And so he came back and said, well, I'm not sure if that's really what we're geared to do. So the Dartmouth students gathered them together. They liked what they saw, and the pastor and other pastors liked it. So we started regular classes at the time. We started just with a certificate program, and then they said we want more, so we went into a master's level, which would be the same thing that we teach here in the U.S. And then when we finished that, some of the more aggressive pastors who really were enjoying it said, well, what about the Doctor of Ministry, which is a practical theology ministry degree? And so we started that up as well. So when I'll be leaving next Sunday evening to Egypt, it is safe to go there down. I'll talk more about that in a moment. We will have graduation on the 22nd, 2 weeks from today, there, and we have 5 graduating with Master of Divinity degree, and then one who will be graduating with the doctoral level, Mina, who's an outstanding student. And so to see the development, I say to them when I begin the courses, I think I've shared this before, but let me do it again for those who haven't heard it. When I begin my teaching at the beginning of each week, when I go each time, I remind the students that we meet at this conference ground that's owned by the Presbyterian Church of Egypt, that's just outside of Alexandria. And if any of you are historians, you know that Alexandria really was a prominent city, both in the secular world and historically, as well as for the church. Stephen, the first Christian martyr, was most likely from Alexandria, where 70 biblical scholars, Hebrew scholars, got together to translate the Hebrew Old Testament into Greek, because Jews were so dispersed around the world, they were the dispersed ones, that they were forgetting their language, not only to speak it, but also to read it. And so they were afraid, these scholars were, that the Jewish people then would forget their history and their Jewish connections, because they wouldn't be able to read the Hebrew Bible. And so that was the first translation of the Old Testament into another language, and it was into Greek. And that was because Alexandria is named for Alexander the Great. He had conquered the then known world, and as a result, Greek became the common language, the lingua franca. Everyone was speaking that, so they had their tribal language or their national language, and they had to speak Greek. And so it was universal. The Jews could read the Old Testament in their own language, new language, the Greek, and so forth. So it was done in Alexandria. We call it the Septuagint, right? So it's well-known in that sense. When the New Testament began, early on, was one of the strongest churches in the beginning of the early church in the first century. Was a letter from one of the leaders of the church named Clement around the year 95, who wrote a letter, an epistle, not a biblical epistle, but a letter, a major message thing to the church in Rome, and to help them out in some issues that they had at that point. It was also the place where Athanasius and Arius had their conflict about the nature of God, and because of their debate, we had our first ecumenical council in the year 325. And out of that came the doctrine, clarified doctrine, the nature of God, especially as a Trinitarian God. Started right there in Alexandria. And remind them that not only that, but there was a number of other folks, I won't bore you with all of them. And I said, then all along the North Africa coast, it was, North Africa was just a torch. It was just a hotbed for Christianity. So if you go a few countries over to Algeria, what is present-day Algeria, or Augustine. in Hippo. And of course, he probably, of all of these individuals, probably gave us most of our structure for our theological system. And I always say to folks, if you would ask Calvin and Luther in the Reformation what they were, says, well, you know, Calvin, people who follow you call themselves Calvinists, and Luther, people who follow you call themselves Lutheran. What do you call yourselves? And both of them would have answered Augustinian, because of his impact and influence, and that came from North Africa. Go over to country right next door in Carthage, which is now Tunisia, and you had Cyprian. And Cyprian was one of the early bishops of that church, and he gave us a phrase that it says with regard to the church. Ordinarily, this is his phrase, ordinarily, outside of the church, that is the institutional church, outside of the church, there is no salvation. That phrase is in our Westminster Confession of Faith. So that was said in the 200s, you know. So that language survived all that period of time to when we talk about the doctrine of the church. Ordinarily, outside the church, there is no salvation. That is, God raised up the church to speak the gospel, to address the gospel, and make sure that it's clear to the world, so that it's through the church that salvation comes into the world. And even when the church gets a little off place, God still raises up other local bodies of Christ. The Tertullian was there. He's the one that gave us all sorts of words that we use. He actually was the first one to use the word Trinity. He talked about substitute atonement, and many others. So our vocabulary goes back to a lot of what the North Africans gave to the church. So I tell the students, so along the North Africa coast, all this theological and biblical stuff went up the eastern seaboard of the Mediterranean, went up into Turkey, crossed over the Bosphorus Straits into Europe, and settled there during the Middle Ages. Got lost a little bit, got a little ratty, maybe covered up a little bit, but then the Reformation came, and it was all rediscovered. And then with the explorations that took place, especially coming to this country, the explorers and others brought the Reformation here and that biblical teaching. And we dealt with it and sort of westernized it and Americanized it, whatever. But it was basically that content. And I said, now I'm here standing before you, telling you what your forefathers taught us. And the students, whoa, and you know, because they didn't know that. And I said, now, so we're going to start the circle all around again, so that if we forget, then you all are going to be responsible to bring it back. Okay? We're going to keep the circle going till Jesus comes. All right? So that inspired them to want to study. And they'll say, Prof, is that a true story? I said, of course it's true. I said it. You know. It wasn't just a nice little story. Yeah. So anyway, we said at that beginning is that what we are doing then is what was done for us. So we have New Geneva Seminary. It was set up originally not on its own. It was started out as an extension of Knox Theological Seminary in Fort Lauderdale, which I helped start while I was pastoring in Miami. And we thought it would just be something local there, and we never expected it would go to Colorado Springs. It got to Colorado Springs, and they eventually, they said, the board in Fort Lauderdale said, well, we're just going to release you to independency. We took the name New Geneva, and we just continued bringing that model of wanting to have not only students in the classroom, but also taking it extended beyond ourselves. So even though we were sort of a small group, small seminary, I think our impact has been much wider because of the process of starting seminaries like we have in Egypt, okay? And so it's been a joy. So just 24 years, as Pastor Sean said, started there in 2001, and just at the end of 25, that's what we finished, right? After 24 years, I was telling the board they need to replace me, because I said, I'm hale and hearty, but I'm not immortal, okay? One day I will die. And I said, and I accept that readily, just like Paul did, For me to live is Christ and die is gain. And I'm waiting for that gain. But I have eternity to get that gain, so I'm not rushing into it. But I said, so you guys, I don't want to leave you in a lurch. So one day I just sort of keel over, and then you have to pick up pieces. So they finally found a young man one of our graduates to become president, and they asked me to stay on as emeritus, which means it's his job. I'm just going to get the title and work on other things. But I will stay active with going to Egypt. So we started it out, as I said, the way we did, and we want to maintain that. The other thing that that is a real joy is that not only do I tell the students why Alexandria was so important, and if it started one time, it can happen again, and they can be the ones responsible to carry that, is that they need to begin to refocus themselves just internally, just looking inward in Egypt to themselves as a church, and begin looking outward, both in terms of their community, because they're in a night evangelism. You can do it, but it has to be very careful. And so, we're beginning to see that take place because they were more insulated. They thought they were afraid, and now these younger pastors have been empowered. And the other part is not only that, but also to become and have a sending church. And when I said that the first time, one of the students afterwards during a break said, but Dr. Aquila, we just, we're poor, we don't have much. Just remember who's rich. God is rich in grace and mercy, but he is also, God is rich in grace and mercy, but he is also rich in other ways, and he will do it. If you set that as a goal of becoming a sending church so that you can send men out to other countries and take this message because you speak Arabic. I said, of all the, and take this message because you speak Arabic. I said, of all the Arabic-speaking countries, Egypt is in a unique setting. God has positioned it. Look how often it's because of where its location. And I said, now for the gospel, now for the gospel's sake, it's a FOPS two ways. You can go an Egyptian two ways. You can go an Egyptian go anywhere because he speaks Arabic or she does. The gospel, you would have something you don't have to break in anything except to get used to the particular culture of that country, and but they'll welcome you because Egyptians are well thought of within the broader community, geographically, politically, and otherwise. And so just in the last couple of years, we've seen the sending part beginning to happen, so that we now have students who have graduated, have served in Egypt, but now they're going to places like the United Emirates. We have another one in northern Iraq working with the Kurds. The Kurds cover about 4 nations. They go from Syria and Iraq to Iran and also parts of Turkey. And so they don't have the northern Iraq is usually known as Kurdistan, but it covers that wide swath. And so we have someone that we had started a program in northern Iraq and working with the Kurds, and they do speak Arabic, so that it's good. And then just in the last couple of years, we are partnering with Mission to the World, MTW, in southern Turkey. Now, what's in southern Turkey is that Syria has had a big revolution, a lot of this dust up still going even after their last dictator is gone. And so these Syrian Kurds are in southern Turkey, and Turkey doesn't like the Kurds, so they put a line there and says, you can't cross this line, stay there. And so some Christians have gone and begun ministering to them. They said, we need help. And so MTW found out about that. There are 2 men who have been serving in Alexandria for almost 20-some years, and they found out about it. So they came to us and said, you already have the curriculum. we have the contacts, can we work together on this? And we said yes, and I said, I would like to also for you to use